Hi everyone. Someone suggested I look at this Majority Report video in which the presenter Emma Vigeland talks to Erin, who describes himself as a leading trans journalist. I checked it out and now I'll have a cathartic rant about it. The video is called The GOP's Anti-Trans Bathroom Panic, and, of course, calling it that is to gratuitously mock women's feelings about having to share certain spaces with men, the ones in which many of us can feel vulnerable. Though not Emma, obviously, she's better than that. Let's jump in.
It is wild to be using the bathroom and to get a notification on my phone that says that I'm not going to be allowed to use the bathroom. It's the same bathroom I've been using for years.
Is it really? Why, how incredibly selfish of you to have been using a bathroom that was intended for women without a care for whether women in that space minded or not.
We had that notification that Nancy Mace's resolution to ban trans people in the Capitol from bathrooms where it was going to be accepted by Speaker Johnson.
I wonder why Erin is saying that the resolution was to ban trans people from bathrooms, which he knows, we all know, it's not true. The resolution was to ensure that people use the correct bathroom, or locker room, or whatever, for their sex. If there's one thing we are used to from so-called trans rights activists now, it is that they never let the truth get in the way of the narrative in which they are the victims. Of course, if they were truthful, that would expose the fact that their demands are not based on reason and humanity, but on a narcissistic sense of self-entitlement. I see there was a big protest over this issue and a bunch of them got arrested. Good.
And, that resolution, it impacts so many people because I don't think people understand how many queer or trans or gender nonconforming Capitol workers there are, but there's a lot. There's a lot of staffers. There's a lot of people that that don't have, private bathrooms to go to. And so it gets very difficult for them.
They call it an anti-trans panic, but who's panicking now? What is so difficult about just using the correct bathroom for their sex? These people have got so used to having their own way without having to justify it. It's almost like they don't think they have to, or even that they know they can't. I mean, what are they going to say? Okay, my presence in your space causes you distress, but it distresses me to have to go to spaces designated for members of my sex, and whose feelings matter more, yours or mine?
I spoke to several Democrats. I think that a lot of Democrats do get it. A lot of Democrats do understand the sort of like the vitriol that Sarah McBride is currently seeing and the vitriol that we're seeing from people like Nancy Mace.
What vitriol? Is it anything like the vitriol that is directed at those who dare to speak out against gender ideology and the devastating effect it is having on so many lives? Do you see comments like these directed at McBride? Do you see exhibitions celebrating anti-trans violence like this one in San Francisco, which promoted violence against real feminists, aka TERFs? Oh, poor Sarah McBride, from a country where trans activist bullies will try to stop women speaking freely, violently attack them, and produce horrific, hateful imagery and joke about paedophilia. How upsetting it must be to be called out on your selfish behaviour. So, Emma Vigeland reads from something he wrote on his blog. The blog is called Erin in the Morning, and the piece is entitled Republican Bathroom Panic Over McBride Shows It Was Never About Sports or Kids.
In a move as predictable as it is outrageous, Republicans have launched a full-blown crusade against the first transgender Congresswoman, Sarah McBride.
Outrageous. A full-blown crusade. It's interesting that he would use a word that invokes medieval wars that were notorious for their scope and their brutality to describe a resolution to get people to just stick to their own single-sex spaces. Overreact much?
Representative Nancy Mace has introduced a resolution to ban McBride from using women's bathrooms and locker rooms. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has hinted at so-called accommodations that would effectively segregate McBride from public facilities entirely.
OMG, he's such a liar. McBride won't be segregated from public facilities entirely. He's a man. He can use the men's facilities. Again, what is the problem?
This uproar comes as some Democrats and pundits toy with the idea of compromising on transgender rights, particularly in areas like sports.
They are toying with the idea of compromising on men's rights to cheat in women's sports. Well, let's hope they don't toy too long. Too many women and girls have already lost out to male sports cheats.
On the pitch and on the court, get men out of women's sports! On the pitch and on the court, get men out of women's sports!
We had a great time at the Wembley Stadium protest, by the way, and lots of support from ordinary football fans who are outraged about young sportswomen having their dreams crushed by men in their sports. And what is the point of Emma Vigeland? Is it just to look pretty? She's in denial that men in women's spaces can be a problem for other women, but then she's very young, maybe she doesn't have other women's inhibitions or bad experiences to draw on to inform her perspective. Maybe she's ignorant of things that have happened, which is inexcusable for a journalist, of course. But is she also in denial that sportsmen have an unfair physical advantage against sportswomen and only have to be mediocre to beat the best female athletes? Any journalist worthy of the name would engage her guest on this topic, seeing as he raised it. I just don't get it. She's a zombie.
Today's events lay bare the folly of such a strategy. There can be no middle ground with those intent on erasing transgender Americans from public life.
There should be no middle ground, no compromise. Men need to stay out of women's single-sex spaces and sports. Women and girls have suffered long enough from this men's rights movement, and children need to stop being misled into believing they could have been born in the wrong body and that the path to happiness lies in invasive, risky medical interventions and irreversible surgeries. But that doesn't mean you can't call yourself a girly name and ponce around in a frock if that's what floats your boat. You're not going to get arrested for just living out your fantasy as long as you don't do so in a way that negatively impacts on others. Stop being such a drama farmer. One more thing from Erin's blog that Emma doesn't read out. The reaction to McBride makes one thing crystal clear to Democrats and pundits alike. The Republican Party's debate over transgender Americans was never about sports or prison inmates. Time and again, when given an inch, they take everything. There goes my irony meter. His blog post is much like this conversation with his handmaid, full of unsupported statements. The strategy is to just keep misrepresenting the truth, let's say, and often the irony is just out of this world.
You know, I was on Piers Morgan yesterday debating this topic, and I said to him, oh, so separate but equal, which he bristled at, right? But that's exactly what it is.
That piqued my interest enough to seek out the video. Piers Morgan hosts 4 guest speakers, including Emma. Let's see a bit of it.
If you're a congresswoman who survived sexual assault, you should be entitled to feel safe in the restroom.
The presence of a trans woman in the bathroom. Oh gosh, you know, here in New York, there are a lot of multi-gender bathrooms, and I've gone to the bathroom next to a man. Oh my goodness, it was so fearful. What was I going to do be quite fearful if
I found you lurking next to me in a...
So here she is again, openly mocking women who feel vulnerable using public mixed-sex toilets. Look at her face. Sorry, but does this woman call herself a feminist? How?
Why is there something inherently perverted about going to the bathroom? You right-wingers, and yes, I'm including you in this with this classical liberal BS, are so bad faith. It's incredible.
I'm not sure why she's accusing anyone of saying there is something inherently perverted about going to the bathroom. Is she being disingenuous here? In which case, she's the one arguing in bad faith. Or is she just thick? I think I've mentioned Hanlon's razor before. Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. But it's hard to believe she can be that stupid, isn't it? But then again, look at this.
It's incredible. You
Right.
are linking sexual abuse and sexual assault to trans people inherently.
No, it's incredible that she can make that accusation. It's not about trans people. It's about men being in women's spaces, whatever they identify as.
And that is a bigoted
No,
statement.
I want trans people to
Absolutely
have, I want them to have fairness and equality like the rest of us, just not where it erodes women's rights. But Deborah Lee, you've been listening to this patiently.
But separate
All
but
right,
equal.
Emma,
Separate but equal.
we're four
right,
people
Piers?
on the
I would
panel.
like to
Yeah.
respond to this.
Deborah,
There it is, separate but equal. Did Piers bristle, as she claimed? I don't think so. He simply pointed out that there were other guests on the panel. But why is she saying separate but equal as if it's some kind of gotcha? For those who don't get the reference, separate but equal was a legal doctrine created in the late 19th century to allow the enforcement of racial segregation in parts of the US without violating the Constitution, which guarantees equal protection under the law. The idea was that as long as the facilities and services for African Americans were of an equal standard to those of whites, then the races could be kept separate. Of course, in practice, facilities and services for black people were consistently inferior or non-existent. So, Emma, here's a reminder of what she said.
I said to him, oh, so separate but equal, which he bristled at, right? But that's exactly what it is.
So, Emma is saying in all seriousness that to require a white middle-class young man like McBride to use the bathrooms designated for people of his own sex in the congressional buildings is exactly the same as how African Americans were treated under the Jim Crow laws. The mind boggles. And then we get this.
The fear that regular folks just walking, just existing in the Capitol building, needing to use the facilities, are now going to feel because the majority party in both the Senate and the House has decided, no, human rights, we're going to put a boot on your neck in this regard.
Really? Are the Capitol buildings turning into Afghanistan or something? Ordinary people are happy to use the spaces designated for their sex. Numbskull, they don't demand special privileges, but the ones that do, it seems they've got a boot on their neck, preventing them from disregarding women's wish for privacy and dignity. Wow, why aren't these people revolting? Oh wait, they are.
The reason why they are targeting her is because if Sarah McBride is dangerous in a bathroom, then any trans person is.
Right. Again, this is the same silly tactic that Emma tried with Piers Morgan. They just have to pretend that it's not about the rights of people to feel comfortable and safe in places where they've got their knickers down or off.
And people are saying that she's dangerous, that she's going to assault fellow congresswomen. Like, we literally had Nancy Mace and Marjorie Taylor Greene accuse her of potentially assaulting fellow congresswomen.
Now, I've looked for the evidence and I can't find anyone saying that McBride is dangerous or that he's going to assault anyone. And to say that Nancy Mace and Marjorie Taylor Greene, another congresswoman, have accused him of potentially assaulting congresswomen is codswallop. The intention is to conjure up a vision of McBride specifically physically molesting a woman. What they have in fact said, both of them, is that they regard men entering women's spaces as an assault in terms of how it makes them feel. They perceive it as an act of violation. It's kind of like trans-identifying people saying misgendering is violent. It isn't, but that's what it feels like to them. Where the analogy falls down is that using sex-based pronouns is an act of resistance against an oppressive ideology that is imposed on us top-down, while entering wrong-sex spaces is indeed an act of violation in that it violates the privacy of other users.
I don't think that Nancy Mace actually, believes that Sarah McBride is going to assault her in the bathroom. I cannot imagine even considering that, even thinking that. I don't think that it's about sexual assault. It's not about protecting women.
Of course, she doesn't think McBride is going to assault her, and indeed, it's not just about sexual assault. For too long, the gender ideologues have set the parameters of this debate, for want of a better word, and they've made it only about worst case scenarios, which are going to be very rare. Of course they are, but they have happened. Women and little girls have been violated by men in public toilets and other places where they shouldn't have been. And some of those men had a penchant for wearing dresses, which is the only thing that distinguishes them from men that don't. But it is about protecting women, not just from sexual assault, but from being made to feel uncomfortable, anxious, embarrassed, unsafe. So what on earth is Erin Reed talking about?
You have the Republican Congress people that have been pushing this really heavily. They've been the chief proponents of crackdowns on women's rights. They've been the chief proponents of crackdowns on reproductive health care and on other freedoms that, women want to enjoy. And just because of this, it shows that it's never been about sports. It's never been about bathrooms. It's never been about kids.
Yes, it has always been the case that people, not just politicians, but in the population at large, will support some women's rights and not others. Conservatives, especially religious ones, have often not supported women's rights to access contraception and abortion. In fact, the same can be said of some religious people across the political spectrum. But they will support the right of women to have single-sex spaces, as does anyone with an ounce of human decency, whatever political views they hold. They also care about young sportswomen, who may, of course, be their own daughters, being cheated. They care about kids being misled into believing that so-called gender identity defines what they are. But many people who, on the other hand, see themselves as progressives don't care about any of those things, except women's access to contraception and abortion. But then those things benefit men too, funnily enough.
They want it to, goad McBride into doing something so that they could kick her out. That was the goal. They don't want her to be there in that room with them.
Oh, so in fact they do want McBride to be in that room with them. That's what it's all about. It's a conspiracy to goad McBride into breaking the rules so they can kick him out.
Last night, Nancy Mace did an interview with Newsmax where I think she finally made clear why she is taking these positions. It's not about sexual assault.
Nancy Mace has said repeatedly that this is important to her as a rape survivor. Of course, you don't have to be a rape survivor to not want a man anywhere near you when you are semi-undressed, and a lot of men have no problem understanding this, and no doubt plenty of them feel the same about women. So often it is the men who demand to be treated as women themselves who don't understand, who dismiss out of hand women's feeling of vulnerability. Let's see what Nancy actually said.
You became famous basically by being the first woman at the Citadel, right? First female graduate. How do you feel about her rise to this kind of prominence? Being a member of Congress is a big deal, and I can't see any other accomplishment other than being a transgender.
Well, I've broken many glass ceilings. As you said, I was the first woman to graduate from the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina. I'm the first Republican woman ever elected to Congress from the great state of South Carolina. It is offensive that a man in a skirt thinks that he's my equal, like that his challenges are the same as mine. They're not.
Okay, this Greg Kelly guy, I watched the whole thing, and he is as sycophantic over Nancy Mace as Emma Vigeland is about Erin Reed. And he was comparing McBride to Mace in terms of their accomplishments in life prior to their becoming politicians. And he was suggesting they were unequal, which is a moot point because they are both democratically elected politicians of equal status in that respect. And in response to Greg Kelly, Nancy Mace was clearly using the word equal in the sense of the same as. She was addressing the ever-present, though often unspoken, claim that a trans-identifying man is the same as a woman, is in fact a woman. Another woman may have faced similar challenges in breaking different glass ceilings. A young man in a skirt won't have. He will, of course, have faced different challenges, but they don't justify his being in women's spaces. Erin Reed, of course, seizes on the word equal and uses it in the sense of equal worth as a human being, and he totally misrepresents what Nancy says. I think this is called the equivocation fallacy, when you use different meanings of the same word to be deceptive.
I just want to make that so clear. It's not about any of that other stuff. It's about the audacity that a transgender person could ever be considered their equal.
Note the use of the word transgender person. Nancy did not say transgender person. She said man in a skirt. She hasn't said anything about women who LARP as men. Calling them trans people is a way of treating them all, men and women, old and young, as a homogenous group, when they are not, when the reasons for seeking transition are very different, and when the impact on others of their demands as trans-identifying people are very different. Again, it's a strategy that depends on deflecting attention from and disregarding what Nancy is saying and attributing to her opinions she hasn't expressed in order to make her look like the villain here. Now, I've run out of patience with Reed, so I'm just going to have one last go at Vigeland.
And Mace using her white female victimhood in this instance, right?
Using her white female victimhood. I wish she would explain exactly what she means by this. It always surprises me when we are asked why we care so much. Why not just live and let people be who they are? They aren't a problem for you. We shouldn't have to justify why we don't want men in our spaces, but we do, because if we don't, they treat it as an open goal. The goalkeeper is gone. The gatekeeper has left the park. Get in there and stay there. Say it's your right and make them change the rules. That's what they did. Now, to get them out, we are expected to give our reasoning, to justify why we feel as we do, and when we do, we are told we are using our victimhood. This is exactly what happened to J.K. Rowling. She got attacked when she stuck her head above the parapet on gender lunacy. She wrote that short essay explaining why she had decided to speak out as a survivor of male violence. The result was that the attacks on her escalated. I remember Piers Morgan even saying to Kathleen Stock on TV that JK had played the victim card. Emma Vigeland will always put what men want first. And luckily for her, Nancy Mace is white, so she feels entitled to say this.
You see this when it comes to other targeting of minority groups or traditionally repressed groups, whether it be how many black men were lynched in this country because white women often falsely would accuse black men of sexual assault.
And there we have it. Rape survivor who is standing for women's rights against 21st century well-to-do privileged men and simply demanding that they stick to their own perfectly amenable spaces instead of invading ours is analogized with women who made false accusations without a care that doing so would most likely lead to the murder of innocent men of an oppressed minority in the last century. Can there be a clearer sign of her desperation for the approval of this deeply misogynistic cult? Can she sink any lower? Can she debase herself any more? I don't think so, and I'm done ranting for now. I'll give the last word to Nancy. Cheers.
I'm not going to allow biological men into women's private spaces. I will stand in the brink and stand in the way of anyone on the radical left who thinks that it's okay for a penis to be in a women's locker room or a bathroom or a changing room. Hell no. I'm a survivor of rape. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse. And I'm not going to allow any man in any female private spaces.
Now, Speaker.
End of story.